I spent 40 years building my company from nothing, only to discover my wife and son had been planning to steal it all along. The DNA test results in my pocket were about to change everything at what they thought would be their victory party. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the light streams through the windows and makes everything look better than it really is. I was in my home office, reviewing the final succession documents for Meridian Technologies, the company I'd built through 4 decades of 18-hour days and missed family vacations. I took a sip of coffee from my favorite mug, the chipped one with our company logo that had been with me since the early days. The house was quiet except for the occasional sounds of my wife Caroline moving around in the kitchen downstairs. Too quiet, really. That silence had grown between us over the years, but lately it felt different, heavier. Caroline appeared in the doorway, perfect as always in her designer outfit, not a strand of her blonde hair out of place despite the early hour. "Working already?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It hadn't for months now. "Just reviewing some things for the ceremony," I said, closing the folder on my desk. "Big day coming up." "Alex is very excited," she said, referring to our son. My son. Or so I had believed for 30 years. He's been waiting for this his whole life. Something in her tone made me look up. There was a hint of triumph there, poorly concealed. I'd been hearing that tone more frequently as my retirement approached and Alex's takeover of the company drew nearer. "Has he?" I asked mildly, taking another sip from my mug. "That's good to hear." She lingered a moment too long before walking away. I waited until her footsteps faded, then reopened the folder containing the DNA test results that had arrived yesterday. The paper was already creased from how many times I'd unfolded and refolded it, hoping the results might somehow change. They wouldn't. The clinical language was brutally clear, 0% probability of paternity. Alex wasn't my son, never had been. I should have felt rage. Instead, there was only a cold clarity as pieces fell into place. The subtle differences in appearance I'd always attributed to Caroline's side of the family. Alex's complete lack of interest in the engineering aspects of the business, despite my repeated attempts to mentor him. The way he and Caroline would sometimes exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. How long had they known? Had they always known? 30 years of family photos on my office wall suddenly felt like elaborate props in a play where I was the only one who didn't know the script. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Going over the speech for Friday. Can't wait to take the reins, Dad. You've earned your rest." Dad. The word twisted in my chest. I typed back, "Looking forward to it, son." The lies came easily now. I was learning from the best. I'd first noticed something was wrong 6 months ago. Caroline had been acting strange whenever retirement came up. Too enthusiastic, too insistent that I should enjoy my golden years and let Alex handle things. Then I overheard a phone call. She was in the garden, thinking I was out at a meeting. "It's all happening just like we planned," she'd said to someone. "Once he signs everything over at the ceremony, we can finally stop pretending." At first, I thought she might be having an affair, planning to leave me once the company transition was complete. I hired a private investigator, expecting to find evidence of a lover. Instead, I found something far worse. The PI discovered emails between Caroline and Alex discussing their long game, how they'd positioned him to take over, how they'd manipulated me for years. In one particularly vicious exchange, Alex had written, "The old man has no idea. Why would he? He's always been so desperate to believe he had a son to carry on his precious legacy." Caroline had replied, "Just keep playing the dutiful son for a few more months. After the ceremony, Meridian is ours and he can die wondering what happened." Die wondering. Those words had burned themselves into my brain. That night I'd sat in my dark office until morning, the emails printed and spread before me, trying to understand how the two people I loved most could have deceived me so completely. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. First, I needed absolute confirmation. Hence the DNA test, using a strand of hair from Alex's old baseball cap and my own saliva sample. Second, I needed to understand exactly what they were planning. So I played along, acting the part of the proud father eager to hand over his life's work to his son. Third, I needed to protect what was mine. The succession ceremony was planned for Friday, a grand affair with 200 guests, including all our major clients, industry partners, and the local business press. Caroline had insisted on making it a splashy event. "You deserve recognition for all you've built," she'd said. Now I understood her real motivation. A public coronation for Alex, with no possibility of me backing out once announcements were made, in front of everyone who mattered. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the last 3 months quietly meeting with my lawyers. The company ownership structure was more complex than either Caroline or Alex realized. While Alex had been given increasingly visible roles in the company over the years, actual control was a different matter entirely. I also reviewed our prenuptial agreement, which Caroline had signed 35 years ago when I was still a struggling entrepreneur with big dreams, and she was a beautiful receptionist who somehow found me worthy of her attention. The terms were clear. Any attempt at fraud would result in her receiving nothing in a divorce. The week before the ceremony crawled by. Every dinner at home felt like an elaborate charade. Caroline asking about my day with practiced interest. Alex calling to discuss last-minute details about the ceremony, his voice brimming with barely concealed excitement. "I've had the team prepare a video tribute to your career, Dad," he told me. "Everyone's going to see what you built and how I'm going to take it to the next level." "That's thoughtful," I replied, wondering if he'd practice calling me Dad in the mirror, perfecting the right amount of affection. "I'm looking forward to seeing it." 3 days before the ceremony, I met with Thomas, my chief financial officer and oldest friend. He was the only person I'd confided in. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Richard?" he asked as we sat in a private room at our club, far from any potential eavesdroppers. "It's going to be brutal. Very public." I rotated my coffee cup slowly, watching the liquid swirl. "They were going to take everything, Thomas. Not just the company. My whole life has been a lie." I looked up at him. "Wouldn't you want to know the truth, no matter how painful?" He nodded slowly. "I've got everything prepared, as you asked. Just say the word, and we execute the plan." The morning of the ceremony arrived with perfect weather, as if even the universe was conspiring to make their triumph complete. I dressed carefully in my best suit. Caroline fussed over my tie. "You look handsome," she said, smoothing my lapels with familiar hands that now felt like a stranger's. "Are you ready for your big speech?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, meeting her eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw something there. A flicker of guilt, perhaps? But it was gone instantly, replaced by that same artificial warmth she'd perfected over the years. The event was being held at the Grand Hotel downtown. As we pulled up, I could see the Meridian Technologies banners hanging in the ballroom windows. "Celebrating a legacy, embracing the future," they proclaimed in our company colors. Alex was already there, working the room like he was born to it. Perhaps he was. His biological father, whoever he might be, must be proud. "Dad," he called out when he saw me, arms spread wide for an embrace that felt hollow. "Man of the hour." I hugged him back, wondering if he could feel how stiff I was. "Quite the turnout," I observed, looking around at the packed ballroom. "Only the best for you," Caroline said, taking my arm possessively. "Everyone who matters is here." That was exactly what I was counting on. The first hour was cocktails and mingling. I shook hands, accepted congratulations, and nodded as people told me how lucky I was to have such a capable son to carry on my legacy. Each comment was a twist of the knife. Finally, it was time for the formal portion of the event. Thomas caught my eye from across the room and gave me an imperceptible nod. Everything was in place. Alex took the stage first, handsome and confident in his custom suit. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room, "we're here today to honor an incredible man and his legacy." I watched from my seat at the front table as he launched into his speech. It was masterfully crafted, full of personal anecdotes about learning at my knee, being inspired by my work ethic, and how proud he was to be my son. The audience was captivated. Caroline squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening with what I now recognized as anticipation rather than emotion. "And so," Alex continued, reaching the climax of his speech, "it is with immense pride that I accept the responsibility of leading Meridian Technologies into its next chapter. Dad, you built something extraordinary, and I promise to honor that legacy with every decision I make." The room burst into applause. Alex gestured toward me, his smile wide and triumphant. "Dad, would you like to say a few words?" This was it. I rose slowly, straightening my jacket as I approached the podium. Alex clapped me on the shoulder as we passed each other, a gesture that would look affectionate to everyone watching. Only I could feel the subtle pressure in it, the unspoken message. We won. I stood at the microphone and surveyed the room. So many familiar faces. Clients I'd worked with for decades, employees who'd been with me since the early days, and in the front row, Caroline and Alex, twin expressions of anticipation on their faces. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice steady. "When I started Meridian Technologies 40 years ago in my garage, I never imagined standing here before all of you. This company has been my life's work, my passion, and yes, what I hoped would be my legacy." I paused, taking a sip of water. Caroline was beaming now, practically vibrating with excitement. "Family and legacy are interesting concepts," I continued. "We often think they're about blood, about passing something to the next generation of our line. But I've come to realize that true legacy isn't about DNA. It's about values, about trust, about truth." A slight furrow appeared between Alex's eyebrows. Caroline's smile froze. "The truth is a powerful thing," I said, reaching into my inside pocket. "Sometimes it arrives in unexpected packages." I removed the folded DNA test results and placed them on the podium. Then I reached into my other pocket and pulled out printed copies of the emails between Caroline and Alex. For instance, I recently discovered some truths about my own family. Truths that changed everything I thought I knew about the past 30 years. The room had gone completely silent. Caroline's face had drained of color. "Alex is not my biological son," I said simply. "And for some time now, he and my wife have been planning to take control of my company under false pretenses." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Alex half rose from his seat, his face contorted with shock and anger. "That's ridiculous," he sputtered. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I held up the DNA test. "Science doesn't lie, Alex, unlike you and your mother." "This is insane," Caroline hissed, loud enough for the front tables to hear. "Richard, you're having some kind of breakdown." I ignored her, continuing calmly. "I have here emails between my wife and Alex discussing their long game. How they've manipulated me, how they've lied to me for years, and how they plan to take everything once I sign the company over today." I nodded to Thomas, who pressed a button on his laptop. The large screen behind me, which had been displaying a slideshow of company milestones, now showed one of the emails, blown up for all to see. "Just keep playing the dutiful son for a few more months. After the ceremony, Meridian is ours, and he can die wondering what happened." Caroline lunged to her feet. "Those are fake. He's fabricated all of this." "The emails have been authenticated by 2 separate digital forensics firms," I said, still maintaining my calm. "The DNA test was conducted by the most reputable laboratory in the state. But most damning of all is your reaction right now." Alex had gone from red-faced anger to ashen fear. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I don't need to prove anything else. Because here's what you both failed to understand about Meridian Technologies." I allowed myself a small smile. "While Alex has held increasingly visible positions in the company, actual controlling interest has always remained with me through a complex structure of voting shares and trust arrangements." I turned slightly to address the wider audience. There was never going to be a transfer of control today. The ceremony was purely symbolic. A test, if you will. One that Caroline and Alex have failed spectacularly. The room erupted. Some people were on their feet. Others were whispering frantically to their neighbors. Caroline was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "Furthermore," I continued once the noise had subsided somewhat, "according to our prenuptial agreement, Caroline's attempt at fraud nullifies any claim she might have had to my assets in a divorce. Papers were filed this morning." Alex surged forward toward the stage, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. I've worked for this company for years. I've earned my place." "You've had a job, Alex," I corrected him. "One you were well compensated for. But you didn't earn anything beyond that, and you certainly didn't earn the right to steal what I built." Security personnel, arranged by Thomas earlier, moved to flank Alex, not touching him, but making their presence known. "As of this morning," I continued, "Alex is no longer employed by Meridian Technologies. And as of this moment, I am announcing a new succession plan." I gestured to a group of people seated at a table to my right, my most trusted executives, people who had truly helped build the company through talent and loyalty, rather than deception. These are the people who will guide Meridian into its next chapter. People chosen for their integrity, their skill, and their genuine commitment to what this company stands for. Caroline had begun to cry. mascara tracking down her perfectly made-up face. But I knew her well enough to recognize that these were tears of rage and frustration, not remorse. "Richard, please," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We can talk about this privately. You're humiliating all of us." "That's interesting," I replied, "because you and Alex were perfectly happy to humiliate me today. The difference is, I'm simply telling the truth." I turned back to the audience, many of whom looked stunned by what they were witnessing. "I apologize for turning what you thought would be a celebration into something else entirely. But I believe in transparency, and I couldn't allow this deception to continue one day longer." I stepped away from the podium, feeling lighter than I had in months. Thomas immediately took the stage to manage the situation, announcing that the formal portion of the event was concluded and inviting guests to stay for lunch if they wished. As I walked down from the stage, people parted before me, some reaching out to touch my arm or shoulder in awkward support. I passed by Caroline and Alex without looking at them. I heard Alex call after me, his voice cracking with desperation and anger, but I kept walking. Outside in the hotel lobby, I finally stopped, suddenly unsure where to go or what to do next. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me hollow. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Maria, my executive assistant of 15 years. "Your car is waiting whenever you're ready, Mr. Harmon," she said quietly. "And for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old company keychain, the one with the original Meridian logo that I'd carried since day one. I think I'll keep this after all," I said, more to myself than to her. The following weeks were a blur of legal meetings, press statements, and difficult conversations. Caroline moved out the same day as the ceremony, taking only her personal belongings after my lawyers made it clear that anything else would be considered theft, given the circumstances. Alex tried various tactics, threats, pleading, even an attempt to sue for wrongful termination. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Eventually, he too disappeared from my life, though I occasionally saw his name in industry publications as he tried to reinvent himself elsewhere. The company survived the scandal. In fact, after the initial shock wore off, many of our partners and clients expressed respect for how I'd handled the situation. Transparency, it turned out, had value even when the truth was ugly. 6 months after the ceremony that wasn't, I sat in my office, looking out over the city as the sun set. The same chipped coffee mug sat on my desk, still my favorite despite Caroline's years of trying to replace it with something more appropriate for a CEO. There was a knock at my door, and Thomas entered with several other executives. "The quarterly numbers look excellent," he said, handing me a report. "The new product line is exceeding projections." I nodded, scanning the figures. "And the succession plan?" "On track," said Jennifer, my new COO. "The leadership team is solid. When you're ready to step back, for real this time, we'll be prepared." "Good," I said, "because I'm thinking about taking that fishing trip to Montana I've been putting off for 20 years. They laughed, and we spent the next hour discussing business. As they filed out, Thomas lingered. "You doing okay, Richard?" he asked once we were alone. "Really okay?" I considered the question seriously. "I'm getting there," I said finally. "Some days are harder than others, but I'm sleeping better than I have in years." He nodded. "You know, that DNA test was the best, worst news you could have gotten. Living a lie isn't living at all." After he left, I stayed at my desk, turning my old keychain over in my hands. The metal was worn smooth from decades of handling. Like me, it had weathered a lot, but remained essentially intact. I'd lost the family I thought I had, but I'd gained something perhaps more valuable: truth, clarity, and the freedom to define family on my own terms. The people who had stood by me through this ordeal, Thomas, Maria, my loyal executives, even a few old friends who had reached out with support, they were more family to me now than Caroline or Alex had ever truly been. Family, I'd come to realize, wasn't about shared DNA. It was about shared values, shared trust, shared truth. I put the keychain back in my pocket, picked up my chipped coffee mug, and headed home. Tomorrow would be another day of rebuilding, of moving forward. And for the first time in a very long time, I was actually looking forward to it.